Okay, so today is the 9th of April, 2023, and we'll have a rather lengthy presentation of Frank Lloyd Wright. Today, on the 9th of April, 1959, he died. So there are 64 years since Frank Lloyd Wright died today, on the 9th of April. So I will make several presentations about him, and my ambition, if I am to call it so, is to pay homage to him for about 4 hours. So let me begin. Frank Lloyd Wright, or as his students sometimes used to call him, Frank Lloyd Wrong, was born in 1867 and died, as I said, on April 9th, 1959. Let's read a little bit about him before we review most of his works, or some of his works, because he made so many that it is impossible to go through all of them in not just one presentation, but 10 or 20. So Frank Lloyd Wright, June 8th, 1867, April 9th, 1959, was an American architect, designer, writer, and educator. He designed more than 1,000 structures over a creative period of 70 years. Wright played a key role in the architectural movements of the 20th century, influencing architects worldwide through his works and hundreds of apprentices in his ateliers and fellowship. Wright believed in designing in harmony with humanity and the environment, a philosophy he called organic architecture. This philosophy was exemplified in Falling Water, built in 1935, which has been called the best all-time work of American architecture, which I visited, and we'll talk at length about it. Wright was the pioneer of what came to be called the Prairie School movement of architecture, and also developed the concept of the Usonian home in Broadacre City, his vision for urban planning in the United States. He also designed original and innovative offices, churches, schools, skyscrapers, hotels, museums, and other commercial projects. Wright designed interior elements, including leaded glass windows, floors, furniture, and even tableware, were integrated into these structures. He wrote several books and numerous articles, and was a popular lecturer in the United States and in Europe. Wright was recognized in 1991 by the American Institute of Architects as the greatest American architect of all time. In 2019, a selection of his work became a listed World Heritage Site as the 20th century architecture of Frank Lloyd Wright. Raised in rural Wisconsin, Wright studied civil engineering at the University of Wisconsin and then apprenticed in Chicago briefly with Joseph Lyman Silsby and then with Louis Sullivan at Adler and Sullivan. Wright opened his own successful Chicago practice in 1893 and established a studio in his Oak Park, Illinois home in 1898. His fame increased and his personal life sometimes made headlines. Leaving his first wife, Catherine Tobin, for Mama Cuccini in 1909, the murder of Mama and her children and others at his ateliers and estate by a staff member in 1914, his tempestuous marriage with second wife Miriam Noel, and his courtship and marriage with Olgivana Lazovich. Anyway, education, rather brief, 1885, 1887, 2 years. In 1886, at age 19, Wright was admitted to the University of Wisconsin-Madison as a special student. I don't know what that means, as a special student, and worked under Alan Conover, a professor of civil engineering, before leaving the school without taking a degree. Wright, he studied about 4 semesters, if not 3. Wright was granted an honorary doctorate of fine arts from the university in 1955. In 1886, Wright collaborated with the Chicago architectural firm of Joseph Lyman Silsby, accredited as a draftsman and construction supervisor, on the 1886 Unity Chapel for Wright's family in Spring Green, Wisconsin. And this is going to be the first work that we are going to look at, built in 1886. So Frank Lloyd Wright and Mr. Silsby, Unity Chapel, 1886, Spring Green, Wisconsin. Here it is. Of course, you know, he was very young, and we don't know exactly what he did here, but this is apparently his first work, his first architectural work. Then he was hired by Louis Sullivan from Adler and Sullivan, and from what I read, based on just a drawing, an architectural drawing that Frank Lloyd Wright did, and Sullivan felt that he was to be a good architect, so he hired him. A good intuition he had, although 5 years later, you know, they had you know, a disagreement, to say the least, because the young Frank Lloyd Wright began to appropriate, so to speak, some of the clients that Adler and Sullivan were receiving in order to build by himself. But he always kept the highest affection for Louis Sullivan, and with good reason, because Sullivan was himself a great architect. So the first work in Wisconsin, 1886, by Frank Lloyd Wright, which doesn't announce, of course, the plethora of great works which we will witness very soon. But this work itself is not, you know, something to be ashamed of, you know, considering that, you know, he never studied architecture, and the work is fine. It's not revolutionary, but it's fine. Hillside Homeschool, 1887. You know, there was the influence of the turn of the century, you know, Victorian influences, but it's still, I would say, a good building. Now, a Frank Lloyd Wright home, 1889. He began it. This is in Oak Park, and I visited it, and that's where he had his studio as well. And it's a major work, both at the level of architecture, at the level of you know, biography. That's where he lived with his family and his children. That's where he began to make significant projects. And there are many buildings in Oak Park around this building testifying about his immense prolificity and his immense appetite for creativity, for architecture. So this is in Oak Park, Chicago, a suburb of Chicago, where there is also Unity Temple, a major work, and we are going to see it later. So literally, if you have the patience to attend today the 4 hours of presentations, I think at the end of these 4 hours, you'll have a rather comprehensive understanding of Frank Lloyd Wright and his works. But by far, you know, insufficient, because again, his output was immense. But I will look in detail at most important works that he built, and he built many important works. What's amazing about Frank Lloyd Wright is that he was able to, but architects in general perhaps can do this. They are able to negotiate between their art and life, and you know, even live long lives. I sometimes joke with the students when I tell them, you know, the school might not give you a job at the end of the studies, but they will promise you a long life. Architects in general live long lives. Like at this very moment, there are very important architects who are all over 90. And, you know, Doshi died, I think, at 94 some months ago. Arata Isozaki, the same, around 94. Frank Gehry, I think, is 94. Alvaro Siza is still alive, 90 something. Kenneth Frampton is 92. Peter Eisenman is 90. Richard Meyer is around there too. Not that I like so much Richard Meyer, but he is known. So, you know, many architects live very long lives. And here we have another example. But this was not the case with Sullivan. Sullivan died at, I think, at 67 or so. Anyway, nor H.H. Richardson, the other member of the sacred triad of the great three geniuses of modern North American architecture, the fathers of the modern North American architecture. He died very young, at 40 something. I'm talking about H.H. Richardson, but Wright, as I said, he lived a long life. And he knew how to enjoy both his art, his architecture, and life itself. He fell in love when he felt like living in love, falling in love, and you know, he had a great appetite for art and architecture, and life. They came together, and this is not so common. Many people make sacrifices; they choose one or the other. Well, he was able to handle both. That's why perhaps there is a book called Frank Lloyd Wright, Man of Many Hats. He was able to negotiate between creativity and life with a great dexterity. So this is inside his own home and studio in Oak Park. What can we say? I mean, here we still see things that he kind of avoided it later on, like the arch. You know, again, he was still young. But there are already, for example, I imagine he designed even these chairs with a, you know, rather stringent verticality, perhaps not very comfortable, as I used to say. Quoting from him, he complained later in life that he had certain pain in certain parts of his body because he sat for too long on chairs designed by himself. This studio is still very you know, enticing in terms of space and light. So you know, this man you know, really knew how to you know, follow to the very end his instincts, and he was able to implement what he wanted to do. And again, this is not so easy. When he didn't receive commissions for a long time, almost 10 years, I mean, he kept receiving commissions, but not so many, because America, in its Puritanism, punished him because he left his family, he fell in love, he went to Italy. So when he returned, you know, he received much less commissions, but he began to work on Broadacre City, a utopian kind of project. And, you know, just like Le Corbusier did with Ville Radieuse. So a good architect, even if he or she doesn't have commissions, nobody can stop him or she or her to do works creatively, you know, at their choice. Now, what do we see here? We see architecture, but we also see, you know, symbolic ornaments. He was an architect who, you know, he was born in the 19th century. He lived for a good number of years in the 19th century. He lived for more than half a century in the 20th century. But he was able to bridge between the 19th century and the 20th century. And I actually like this part of his work where he's incorporating, you know, symbolic, metaphorical elements. These are part of what I might call a narrative architecture, something we don't quite do these days. And this is the plan of the house. Of course, it was amplified in time, but all in all, it shows, the richness of life and architecture, or architectural work that this man was able to address simultaneously. A big family, several children, a wife, architecture. Or should I put them in reverse order? Maybe. Well, now it's a touristic, attraction. You see the books and shop. Of course, the time when he lived, there was no store in his quarters. We also see here the octagon, don't we? And the octagon is a very important geometrical figure. And we remember that Leonardo da Vinci used to employ the octagon very often, if not almost exclusively. Maybe we should think again about the complexity of the octagon and the symbolism of the octagon. This man was made by the gods an architect. What can we say? He was born an architect. This is the truth. He didn't need schooling. He declared later on that he remembered those 2 years when he studied whatever he studied as dull years. He didn't value them at all. So maybe Le Corbusier was right. Architecture is not a profession. Architecture is a state of mind. Perhaps we should think about this, what Le Corbusier meant when he said architecture is not a profession, is a state of mind. James Charnley House, 1892. Again, his architecture at this point, well, this was done when he was working for Sullivan. The interior is, from what I read, rather Frank Lloyd Wright, but he worked on this project while working for Adler and Sullivan. This is how the building is today. The exterior is not very impressive, but the interior has some good parts, and I hope I show them here. But again, this was not done individually by Frank Lloyd Wright. It was done by him to an extent within the office of Adler and Sullivan. This part, the interior of the house, shows signs of resolute, or maybe not yet resolute, but signs of making steps towards a more radical modernity. Although we are yet far from being radical, but don't worry, we'll arrive there. The Robert Rolson houses, 1894, also in Chicago, row houses. But you see already the triangles at the top announce, the vivacity of his architecture. I mean, there is already a sign of vigor here for all to see. Subtle fractal geometry. Somebody made this. It wasn't him. There are all kinds of people after the work is done who try to discover all kinds of things that perhaps the architect didn't think about. I don't imagine Frank Lloyd Wright doing this, but maybe instinctually he designed the house in such a way that it accepts even an analytical study under the name fractal geometry or fractal architecture. And these are the plans. I keep saying to myself and to others that the equation that Frank Lloyd Wright thought of is very valid. He said, creativity equals exuberance. And I believe it is so. But life often tries to discourage us to be too exuberant in general and in relation with architecture as well. But he saw that creativity is exuberance. And he was himself exuberant. He also said, talent is good, practice is better, passion is best. Again, talent is good, practice is better, passion is best. So he valued passion the most. And correctly so, because if you have passion, even talent could show up and practice will follow naturally. But if you have talent and you practice, but you have no passion, the work cannot be great. If you practice a lot and you don't have talent and you don't have passion, well, it's better than just working just with talent, but it's still not enough. In order to accomplish the most, you need first passion, because passion leads you to exuberance. Now, the word passion is, almost poetical. Some people could ask, what is passion? Well, it's about the tumultuousness of the heart, because Frank Lloyd Wright, just like Le Corbusier, and they diverged in many ways. They were very different in almost everything, but they agreed that the heart comes first and the brain second. Unfortunately, as Albert Einstein himself knew, often society replaced the first position of the heart with the brain. We forget about the heart, and without the heart, you cannot have passion. That's where it resides. It's about love, to put it simply. If it sounds maybe too, old-fashioned, it's about love. If you love architecture, you have passion. If you have passion, that's the best. Then talent will follow. And I keep giving the example of Vincent van Gogh. Vincent van Gogh, when he started to draw and to paint, didn't show great talent. And here I'm talking about the quintessential painter, one of the most formidable painters of all time. He drew with uneasiness. It's enough to look at his drawings to understand that Vincent van Gogh didn't have the facility that other people had to draw, to paint, but he had an immense soul. He had an immense passion, and it was passion that accelerated the arrival of talent as well. And then, of course, practice, meaning that he dedicated totally himself to painting. It's the same with Frank Lloyd Wright. He dedicated himself to architecture fully. But in the case of Frank Lloyd Wright, he was also able to live, not just to do architecture. Some people just do art, and they turn their back on life because they cannot accommodate the two. But this was not the case with him, as I said. Anyway, this is another building, an early building by Frank Lloyd Wright in Chicago, which exists. And not only itself exists, but also snow, as you can see. We didn't have snow in Bucharest for 3 years in a row. So Bucharest at this point has 3 seasons, not 4, as we used to have. A kitchen, what can we say? Refurbished, of course, with a giant refrigerator, because it seems for most people, we live in order to eat. And it's not that we live in order to eat. I mean, it seems for most people that we live in order to eat, instead of eating in order to live. It's a big problem, I would say. And this kitchen shows clearly what our priorities are. I mean, huge refrigerator and huge TV. In this way, of course, we cannot create with that exuberance that Frank Lloyd Wright was advising us to create. Francisco Terrace Apartments, 1895, no picture, another apartment building in Chicago. Again, I am showing a lot of his works, not all built 500, not all 1000 designed or projected, but many of his works will be seen in these presentations. Let's remember, 64 years ago, in 1959, Frank Lloyd Wright died on the 9th of April. And that's the reason we talk about him today. Francis Apartments, 1895, we are still in the 19th century. The cars are not from the 19th century, but the building is disfigured by, small interventions, lack of care, and so on. John C. Williams House, 1895. Now we are moving in the Oak Park region, and there is a museum with buildings by Le Corbusier. I didn't count them, but there are more than 15, maybe almost 20 or so. One near the other, you can walk between them. Nathan J. Moore House, 1895. Here we still see the influence, of maybe even Victorian architecture, but we also see the drama of the roof and the vigor of a modernity which was knocking insistently at the door in the mind and heart, in the heart and mind of the young Frank Lloyd Wright. Who taught this man architecture? Well, he was lucky, yes, to work with Sullivan, but I think he already had architecture in him. It was in him. So by magic of, the capriciousness of the gods, he was made an architect at his birth. It was in him, in other words, just as it is, or it was in Tadao Ando, for example, because the CV of Tadao Ando is amusing. It is written in his CV, that he was a truck driver, a carpenter, a boxer first, a truck driver, a carpenter, and a Pritzker Prize laureate. So there. I like this building actually by Frank Lloyd Wright. He still has, a level of, maybe insufficiently, cleared up decisions, because you see the first floor of the building and the top floor with a big roof are a little bit in some kind of a disjunction. But maybe exactly because of it, the building is interesting, because it's hybrid. It's not a typical, if we are to call it so, a typical Frank Lloyd Wright building. The roof seems to be a little bit dwarfing what is underneath it. But the roof represents the aspiration of the building, the longing of the building for that exuberance that he himself was praising. He didn't say no to ornament. He was a modern architect, but he didn't say no to ornament. And we see it here, and we see it also in later years. He never completely eliminated ornament. But then even Adolf Loos and Mies van der Rohe didn't completely eliminate ornament, if we consider that they themselves used very ornamental marbles. Mies van der Rohe in Barcelona Pavilion, just to give an example, and Adolf Loos in at least two projects that I know of, which were built, where he uses ornamental marble, even in the Lost House in Vienna. Here we also see the ornament as being present. But many modern, orthodox modern architects eliminated ornament, but ornament is having a significant return, I think, in present days. Partly, perhaps, because of the, the facilities offered to us by parametric design. It's very difficult to find pleasure ad infinitum just working with structure. Architecture, I think, is more than just structure and space. It's also tectonics, no? It's tactility, is the beauty of a detail, ornamentation as well. Since the beginning of architecture, structure and ornament cooperated. Romeo and Juliet windmill from 1896, an erotical building, and its eroticism is, implied in the name, Romeo and Juliet. This is the plan. It's a watermill, but again, he called it so. Obviously, he wanted to do something that was more than just an utilitarian building. And what exactly was in his mind or in his heart or both when he designed this tower, I don't know. So when was it built? 1896. So we still didn't cross the threshold between the 19th century and the 20th century. Here it is. You could almost say, if you are to talk in Jungian terms, that you have here the meeting between the masculine principle and the feminine principle. It's a tower that brings them together. Well, it is not a feminist tower. The lady or the feminine principle is a little shorter than the masculine one, but they are together in some kind of an embrace. Abstracted, but still, readable. Isidore H. Heller House, 1897. Rather assertive chimney. Sorry about the resolution of these pictures. Frank Lloyd Wright home, we already saw it. Now it's the studio edition, 1898. It's this part here, the octagon. I understood he began the adventure of building this building with borrowed money from Louis Sullivan. S.A. Foster House and Stable, 1890. He would accept any commission and he would build, only in part, sometimes compromising. Most of the time, probably he didn't too much. And this was his ability to wear many hats, as the title of that book implied. B. Harley Bradley House, 1900. So we are now right on the threshold between the two centuries. But with those beautiful trees all around the house, you know, you almost do not look at the building. You look at the trees, or I look at the trees. Warren Hickok's house, again, 1900s. We are all again in Oak Park. Ward Winfield Willits' house, another house. Now we see Frank Lloyd Wright making, you know, very clear steps towards horizontalizing his buildings, if I am to express myself in this way, longing for the horizon. And he was a great proponent, although we are going to see very vertical buildings as well. But he became very attached to the earth and to the distant horizon, and he advocating a horizontal architecture that does, you know, justice to its connection to the earth. The Prairie House that he was the proponent of found many examples in his work. William Freakley House, 1901. I only, by necessity, many of these buildings, I only show one picture because we are going to study in detail some of his most important works, but it's impossible to do this in a, you know, in a presentation, you know, in one day, to go through 500 buildings. Frank W. Thomas House, 1901. I saw some of these houses, maybe not all of them. I lived in Chicago for 5 years, and now I am nostalgic, especially when I look at the trees. William Martin House. Now the trees are beautiful everywhere in the world, not just there. William E. Martin House, 1902. Hillside Homeschool 2, 1902. 1902, yes. I have to say, some of his buildings, in my opinion, now I don't know if that's how he planned them, but the material he chose for the sloping roof, to me, seems to be problematic sometimes. I mean, even here in this picture, I expected, maybe he didn't have such, you know, ceramic tiles or slate as I saw in an earlier building, and that there it looks very convincing. But here, I'm not sure it is actually, it doesn't look like a ceramic tile. And, you know, it looks strange to have a, you know, a building with so much stone covered by, I don't know, some kind of an artificial material, which is lightweight and doesn't have the nobility of stone. It's something that I noticed in some of his buildings. We are going to see other examples in this sense. Arthur Hartley House, 1902. Even here, somehow, in my opinion, now it's possible that, considering the age of the buildings, that you know, the material that was used for covering the roof was changed. I would like to think that this is not what he used, even in this case. Also, sometimes, I mean, I visited the Falling Water, the famous house by him. And my impression is, and I'm not excessively tall, my impression was that the ceiling in the living room was not high enough. I know Frank Lloyd Wright was not a tall man. In fact, when I lectured once on him in Chicago, no, in the United States, was not in Chicago, it was actually in East Hampton, New York. I began my presentation showing him on, I discovered the picture with Frank Lloyd Wright on top of a hill with high heels. He had high heels. And I just began the presentation showing his shoes. with those high heels. Now, of course, when I say high heels, do not imagine, those, 10 centimeters, if not more, high heels that ladies wear. No, but still unusual for a man. Anyway, but what I wanted to say is that I at least at the Falling Water building, inside the living room, I can testify that I felt that the ceiling was not tall enough, was not high enough. And even here, when you see the roofing pressing on the windows, you have the feeling that the ceiling there is not very high. Another house from 1903. Maybe he built too much. It's possible. Horse Show Fountain, 1903. Even a fountain. Why not? Carriage House, Conservatory and Pergola, 1903. Darwin D. Martin House, 1903. This is not, we are not in Chicago any longer. I think this is in Buffalo, upstate New York. We are going to look into detail in this rather big house. Edwin Cheney House, 1903. He loved brick. Frank Lloyd Wright loved brick. I do not tire mentioning that he said, give me a brick and I will transform it in its equivalent in gold. Larkin Administration Building, 1904, which was demolished in the 1950s in order to build some kind of a, I don't know, station for trucks, which was never built, and it became a parking lot, an architectural crime. This building, which was one of the, I would say the most significant, one of the most significant buildings by Frank Lloyd Wright, was demolished for nothing. This is the building, and we are going to see also recreated in, through digital means these days. But the building vanished from the face of the earth thanks to the great vision of Homo sapiens. There is a parking lot there instead of this great building. I launched an international architectural competition some years ago in order to envision a new building replacing the pathetic parking lot to reconnect on the spiral of time with the Larkin building. And you can see those works on the website Icarch, icarch.us. Unity Temple, we are back in Oak Park, major work by Frank Lloyd Wright, 1905, 1908. He himself belonged to the Unitarian Church, although, as I mentioned in a short discussion before I started the presentation, he would feel comfortable with any religion, actually, because he was asked, do you believe in God? And he said, I do, but I spell it nature. And when he was asked if he goes to church, he said, I do. This week I go to this church, next week to the other church. And he himself built about 10 so-called sacred buildings, one of them being a synagogue for various denominations. William, his house, 1904, 1905, again, an architectural ship, aspiring to reach the horizon at the edge of the sea, of the ocean. Because the building does have, and it's not the only one, of course, there are other buildings that he built that have this silhouette of some kind of a, I don't know if I'm very inspired now calling it an architectural ship. Mary Adams House, 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. 1905. Frank L. Smith Bank, 1905, and the bank it is, not as important architecturally as the buildings for banks that Louis Sullivan built. Easy Polish Factory, 1905, a factory, maybe without much glory architecturally, but is in this picture is not, maybe it's not used. Anyway, I remember what Bernard Tschumi said about Villa Savoie when after the war, or maybe even during the Second World War, was in a state of decay. And Bernard Tschumi said, you know, the most architectural thing about this building, talking about Villa Savoie, was the state of decay it was in. Now, when I look at this picture, I feel tempted to paraphrase Bernard Tschumi and say the most architectural thing about this building is that water tank, rusted as it is, at the top of the building. Thomas P. Hardy House, 1905. I don't know if my energy level will continue to be high because indeed this man built too much. Darwin D. Martin Gardener's Cottage. Let's call it a cottage. Now you see, what is this thing here? It's an ornament. Clearly, it has no other function but ornamental, geometrical as it is, simple as it is, but it is an ornamental device. River Forest Tennis Club, 1906. I continue to think something is wrong with the material used for the roofing. Gridley House, 1906, the same here. Something is wrong. I don't know if maybe it's just my, belonging to an old city in Europe with medieval, buildings where the roof is always covered with ceramic tiles. And here I see something else. Plus a gray roof is a gray roof. George Miller House, 1906. Avery Coonley House, 1907, 1912. Now I have to tell you, when I visited this house and I saw it, I couldn't go inside. It's a private property. But when I visited this house, when I came close to the fence, I began to dance around it. I don't think too many buildings that I saw in my life had such an emotional impact on me like this building. It truly had, and I hope I have later on in my presentations a more detailed account of this building, because it does deserve it. It's with emotion. I remember how I danced around the building, photographing it. Frederick C. Roby House, the famous Roby House from 1910. Here it is, south of Chicago. Roby House, Frank Lloyd Wright, 1910. Stockman House. We are going to look into detail at some of these buildings. So this is another building, 1908. Raymond Evans House, 1908. No, he truly built too much. Or maybe I did wrongly, trying to show as many buildings as possible. Maybe I should have been a little bit more selective. The next two presentations will be very selective. I will show only the most significant buildings. But this is an aide-memoir of what he built. And in a way, it's good to see, the complete oeuvre. It's not complete, but as much as possible. City National Bank building and Park Inn Hotel, 1910. Some of these works are less known. Another house, 1909. Chicago does have beautiful trees. Now that I recall them. Frank Baker House, 1909. Another one, 1909. This one from 1911, no? 1911, yes. Well, the absence of the trees is a loss. A National Park Pavilion, 1913, 1914. Interesting building. Some of these lesser known buildings, I think, are worthy of being studied more carefully. What is its function? Banff National Park Pavilion. The Avery Coonley School Playhouse, 1914. Another house, 1913. Midway Gardens, it was demolished. How sad. 1913, but demolished in 1919 and 1929. And unfortunately, I don't have pictures. It's a terrible fact that I don't have pictures. An apartment, well, duplex apartments. Another house. Yes, I should have shortened the list. I go a little bit quicker. But this is a very interesting work. It still exists. It's a warehouse. Nothing glorious, a warehouse. But this building, in my opinion, could become some kind of a temple or some kind of a, I mean, I know it was meant to be a warehouse, but its imposing architecture, I think, deserves, contemplating a different function. I like this building. Unfortunately, I only have this picture. Emil Bach House. I used to bike by this house, 1915, and I knew its name, and I associated with a great German composer of Baroque music, who had I don't know how to say, both the ambition and the modesty to sign his musical scripts with three initials, S, D, G, Soli Deo, or Deus or Deo Gloria, to God alone. That's how Bach signed his musical compositions, and I wonder why architects don't do the same. I know of no architect who signs his plans, his drawings, with these three letters, SDG. But I know a film director who used to do the same thing Bach did, and that is Ingmar Bergman, the great, great, great Swedish film director. So anyway, Emil Bach House, 1915. It's not a big house, but I think it has qualities. And one day I entertained the idea to rent an apartment in this tall building here. I didn't in the end, but I thought of doing it to be a neighbor of this building by Frank Lloyd Wright. Now, the famous Imperial Hotel in Japan, which unfortunately, well, fortunately, on one hand, it confronted a devastating earthquake, and it survived. In fact, it was not damaged by earthquake, by the earthquake, but it couldn't survive the bulldozer, the human bulldozer. It was demolished. But the Japanese, they saved a fragment of this very important work by Frank Lloyd Wright, but the hotel does not exist any longer. And it was quite a creation, quite an architectural creation. He spent some time in Japan. He loved Japan. He loved Japanese woodcuts. He loved the ukiyo-e culture. He had a love of anything Japanese until the end of his life. And while he was in Japan, he would ask his son, Lloyd Wright, to take care of his office and his works at that time in California. But I imagine he also built in some other places. Anyway, this Imperial Hotel is a shame it was demolished. What else can I say? Frederick Vogt House, 1916, another house with a with a protective roof that is, in my opinion, I have to study more carefully. Why am I a little bit questioning the validity of these roofs? There is a reason, I think, but I'm not quite aware of it now. Henry Allen House, 1917. Now, this is already, we are in California. I mentioned that when he built that Imperial Hotel in Japan, he asked his son, Lloyd Wright, to take care of the buildings that he was building in California. And this is a house he built in California, one of the 4 textile houses that he built, the Hollyhock House, from 1919 to 1921. Now another, this is in Japan. I forgot about this house, built in Japan. But we see here again and it was around the time, because you see he employs concrete blocks that he created, distinctly ornamental. He was rather reluctant to use concrete. But when he used it, sometimes, like in this case, he used it, unusually with ornaments. And he created, just as he created for the 4 textile houses in California, he created an original personalized concrete block, I think 16 inches by 16 inches square, with a personalized ornamentation. A girls' school in Japan from 1921. Nathan Moore House, 1923, a reconstruction. This one we see, so this was reconstructed. I didn't know this. What we looked at before, it is a reconstructed house. It did look like. Now here, strangely, in this reconstruction, I feel that the roof is more convincing because of the material used, and it's slate. It looks like slate. Alice Miller House, the second textile house, La Miniatura, from 1923 in California. And here you see that concrete block that I mentioned, 16 inches by 16 inches. John Storer House, 1923. Again, a textile house built in California. Charles Ennis House, this is the 4th textile house using the concrete block that I mentioned, but with a, with a different individualized ornament. This was an experimental phase in the work of Frank Lloyd Wright. he didn't quite like ornament. He said not ornament, sorry, concrete. He called concrete a conglomerate. But he used it sometimes unavoidably when you build so much. Taliesin 3, 1925. He had two locations, Taliesin West and Taliesin East. And, you know, depending on the season, he lived and worked in both. Arizona Biltmore Hotel as a consulting architect, 1928. I forgot about this work. Let's read again. It's a hotel. He was only a consulting architect. Kind of interesting. You wouldn't expect Frank Lloyd Wright to be just a consultant, but the building is interesting. And I knew he built only 4 textile houses, but here he uses the same technique, the same, woven facades with concrete blocks that I mentioned. West Hope, 1929. The buildings that are a little bit less known or less publicized or both, to me are the most interesting. Like this one, I forgot about it, but it's you can see that he is experimenting with other things. At least there is no sloping roof here. Falling water, we had to arrive at it. Now the falling water was built for the Kaufman family, and through the the services, so to speak, of the Kaufman Jr., who studied, I don't know if he studied architecture, he studied art history, I think, at Columbia University. He was an admirer of Frank Lloyd Wright, and he probably recommended Frank Lloyd Wright to his father. Anyway, that is Kaufman Sr., to have Frank Lloyd Wright build this house. There is a story, I don't know if it is true, but there is a short anecdote or a story that one day Kaufman Sr., Edgar J. Kaufman Sr., called Frank Lloyd Wright, telling him that he would come to his office at Taliesin East to see the plans for the house, for the falling water. And apparently when he called, Frank Lloyd Wright didn't have any drawings made. And Kaufman told him, I will be there in 2 hours. So apparently in 2 hours, Frank Lloyd Wright created the plans and the sections that actually, without many changes, served as the working drawings later on to build the house. In 2 hours, he already had in his mind crystallized, to an extent, the conception of the house. But from what I read, that's what happened. In two hours, Frank Lloyd Wright created, in good measure, the plans for this very famous building. I visited it, and I have to say a few other things about it, but we'll talk in more detail about it later on when we are going to see many other pictures, sections, plans, and so on. For now, I would just say this, that any client, anyone who would have commissioned an architect to build a house near falling water, you would expect that the house was to be built at a certain distance from the falling water, so to allow for contemplating the falling water. What did Frank Lloyd Wright did? He actually placed the house above the falling water, to be together with it, not just to look at it. This had the consequences for the structure of the building, and we are going to see later what I'm referring to. Anyway, Herbert Jacobs' house, 1937. I like these lesser known buildings, because they are discoveries. They are, when something is too well known, you don't have any longer much surprise any longer. But if you look at works that are less known, you discover new things. It's like a new beginning. Now, the famous complex of building Johnson Wax headquarters from 1936, very accomplished work by Frank Lloyd Wright, and I can only regret that when I was there, it was Sunday, and I was, reticent to disturb the doorman. It was closed to allow me to enter. I just looked through the glass of the doors at the majestic interior. That is this interior, which Toyo Ito, in a rather strange way, copied in one of his more recent works with these mushroom columns. But we are going to see this work also in detail later on. Hana Honeycomb House, 1937. So we still have 22 years more to go before he said goodbye to this earth, if indeed he did. Herbert Johnson House, 1937. The Eliason West, as I said, he had two residences, major as they were, with both, living facilities and, working facilities. This is the Eliason West, the famous Eliason West, where, students from all over the world would come to live and work there. Frank Lloyd Wright put them to work there in various ways, but we'll talk more about it when the time will come later on today. Anyway, Suntop Homes, I guess an attempt to build inexpensively, and I always welcome, efforts in this direction from architects, not to build just for the rich and famous, or just rich, or just famous, but to build also for those who have neither riches nor fame. Charles Manson House, 1938. As you can see in many of these works, brick is present. He loved brick. Now this work is a very important chapel. So it was built before the Second World War in 1938 in Florida, where he built several buildings in a university campus. And this is the most interesting building there built by Frank Lloyd Wright, this chapel, Pfeiffer Chapel. It was built, if I am correct, with students, in some kind of a volunteering effort. And I think it's a great building. Florida, Frank Lloyd Wright. Andrew Armstrong House, 1939. Another house, 1940. Another residence, 1940. Another one. The truth is, I look at these forests and these trees, and I'm amazed how generous the earth is. Sometimes I forget living in a city. Bernard Schwartz House, 1939. Well, I look at those two cars there, and what can I say? The ubiquitous car. George Sturgis House, 1939, a beautiful house. One of his better ones, I would say. Rose Pausen House, 1940. Now this one is not very clear to me. Is it a ruin? It looks like a ruin. It looks good like a ruin as well for the romantically inclined. What is this? Seminar buildings. There I typed wrongly. It's 1940. 1940, 1946, but I don't know where it is. Another, what is this plantation? it's an impressive living room. As you know, in all his houses, in all his domestic architecture, the chimney, the fireplace is the heart of the building, and appropriately so. And I think you know, someone like Gottfried Semper would agree with Frank Lloyd Wright, who always said that, you know, the hearth is the beginning of architecture, thus fire. Greg and for Frank Lloyd Wright it was the same. But it's strange that this man who had the highest affection for fire was actually punished by fire twice in his own life. The first time he was punished tragically. The woman he loved died in a fire, you know, tragic accident. And then in the second one, he lost a part of his collection of woodcuts. Both events took place in Taliesin East. Another house, horizontal as it is and reddish, in a good dialectical play or contrast with the green of nature. Community Christian Church, 1940. They built even an Orthodox church. We are going to see the library, 1941, 1946. Industrial Arts Building, 1946. He was approaching the age of 80 when he designed these buildings. Now we arrive at the masterpiece, Solomon R. Guggenheim Museum, 1943, 1956. So he was almost 80 years old when he designed this building. Well, in 1956. Everybody knows it. Maybe not too many people know that the building behind, which also belongs to the Guggenheim Museum, was designed by Charles Whitney Siegel. But they couldn't compete, and it's good that they didn't even try to compete with the architecture of Frank Lloyd Wright, because Frank Lloyd Wright did achieve his best in this building. Also, what you probably do not know, but we are going, I'm anticipating, because we are going to talk in detail about this building. But now just crossed my mind, and I don't want to forget it. Initially, Frank Lloyd Wright wanted the visitors in the Guggenheim Museum to take the elevator and go to the top of the building and then walk down on the spirals of the ramps. But they built a much smaller elevator, and this is not happening in the reality. But that's what I read, that this was the initial plan. You would go with the elevator at the top and then come down on the ramps, looking at the artworks. Anyway, it's a great work. Another house, 1944, 1948. FSC Administration Building. These are lesser known works by them. I place them on this list since this is a, you know, a commemorative occasion, and I thought of showing as much as possible. But after quantity, quality will follow. We'll look into detail for a certain number of his masterpieces. But this building is not far from being a masterpiece itself. I like very much its simplicity, its honesty, its dialectical interaction with nature, with the nature around. Another house, 1946, he built too many, that's for sure. Alvin Miller House, 1946. He loved nature. He said, you know, study nature, learn from nature. It will never let you down. And I believe he was right. Unitarian Society Meeting House. As I said, he built 10, I think, 10 or 11, I think 10 buildings with the destination, spirit, that is, religious buildings. This is one of them, but not the greatest picture, not the greatest resolution. What is this? Anyway, another residence. Another one. I rush a little bit because I'm anxious to get to the second presentation where we'll look into detail for some of his most important buildings. Another one. Another one. A Fountainhead, the title of a famous book. Carol Alsop House, 1948. I'm afraid now that I show here all 500 projects that were built, or so 500. Look at those huge cars. I read that actually 10% of the entire surface of the United States is covered by asphalt, by parking lots and so on. It's incredible, 10%. All because of its majesty, the car. But architects in general love cars. It's just that these days we should question them. Maybe we should return to the bicycles as much as possible, and to walking. This is an important work in San Francisco, the Morris Gift Shop. It's a little shop, but I don't know if I have in these presentations images of it. It's a spiral interior. I mean, it is a spiral ramp inside. It's like a small version of the Guggenheim, if you want to say so, except that the elevation is different because it is an urban insertion between two existing buildings. But a fine work, this shop in San Francisco. Another house in nature. Most of his buildings are in nature. Usonia Holmes, I should have had more material about this, but maybe with a different occasion. On his birthday in June, when I'll talk again about him. Maybe we'll do a second mini festival, Frank Lloyd Wright then. Another house and another house. My ambition to show everything is probably turning against me now. I'm beginning to be tired myself of so many houses, and some of them very similar in fact 1950 1952, so is over 80, around 85 or so, still working, still dreaming even about Iraq. He did some almost strange projects for Iraq in his later years. (1955). Most works that I showed on this first presentation are, as you see, residencies. I would have liked to see more social housing by Frank Lloyd Wright, but I guess during his time there wasn't such a concern, at least in the United States, for such a function. All horizontal, all close to the earth, as he always wanted to build. Now this is more civic work inside the city in California. George Louis house. This one seems to be abandoned or vandalized or both. Sad. Price Tower. Now this is a priceless tower, I would say. This is a beautiful short skyscraper, if I am to call it so. It's truly a great work, 1952, 1956. So, you know, a few years before he died, he built this jewel. It is a jewel. It's this building here, surrounded by banal architecture. But this building is, I think, and I hope I will present it in detail later on today, the Price Tower. Well, the United States still has a lot of land, but invaded as it is by the multitude of cars and the multitude of buildings, we wonder. Riverview Terrace Restaurant, the Frank Lloyd Wright Visitor Center, 1953. Visitor Center where? I don't know. Anyway, another house, 1954. You see that he is not again avoiding ornament, and the openings in the brick wall testify to it. A lot of horizontality. Now we arrive at another so-called sacred building. The synagogue is a good building, and strangely, perhaps, initially, he conceived something very similar, but for a cathedral in New York City. And the project for the cathedral became a project for a synagogue, smaller, but is an excellent work by Frank Lloyd Wright, with the exception perhaps of a certain formal geometrical aggressivity here in the corners, from my point of view, but maybe I'm wrong. In some pictures, they do look a little bit too assertive. A theater with one of those, you know, excessively optimistic cars in front of it, because very long. Another house, 1957. 1957, he was 90 years old. Harold Price Senior House, 1956. He couldn't stop building. He had to build. Now is this Greek Orthodox Church, which is, to my, in fact, it was completed after he died. He died in 1959. I don't think it's one of his greatest buildings, but I'm glad that at least shows to the Greek Orthodox or to the Orthodox Christianity that it's possible to be less dogmatic. I only have this picture. So it was built at the very end of his life. Another residence, prefabricated house, and I like very much the fact that he also experimented with prefabrication. That's good. Horizontality, horizontality, horizontality. Now the Marin County Civic Center, the project began in 1957, or the construction, 2 years before he died. He was 90, but it was finalized in 1976. If you are so kind, please turn off the microphone, or if you want to say something, please do so. Please turn off the microphone, or again, if you want to say something, please do say so. Anyway, another house. We are approaching the end of this long, prolific life, and then we'll go to perhaps a more interesting part of this homage to Frank Lloyd Wright, looking into detail for some of his most important works. 1957, 1959, 57, 59, a medical clinic. He died, I repeat, in 1959, on this very day, the 9th of April. Carl Schulz House, 1957, redness of the bricks. This was demolished. What can we say? Things happen. Cottage, 1957. At 90, he was still building another house, 1958. This house is nice. Too bad is that other building there behind, which is, you know, affecting the landscape, so to speak. But okay, and now we go to the second presentation. I repeat, I have 4. So the second one will be with looking into detail for some of his most famous buildings. And the last presentation today will be about the unbuilt Frank Lloyd Wright, buildings that were not built or buildings that were demolished and recreated by a Spanish architect through the digital technologies of today. But let's see now the second presentation. Wright 02, the Guggenheim Museum in New York. We look at it in detail. This is the section. I mentioned already that apparently initially it was meant the circulation to take place in this way. You take the elevator, go to the top floor, and then go down the ramps to the very bottom. But this building is the reverse of a building he did that was never built, but we are going to see in the last presentation with also with spiral ramps, but for cars, and you know, the reverse of the Guggenheim Museum. You will understand what I'm trying to say now with imperfect words when we arrive at that project. He drew magnificently. This man loved pencils. He, just like Carlos Scarpa, these people, you know, these great architects, they were so sensitive to pencil drawings. There are pictures with Frank Lloyd Wright sharpening his pencils. As for Carlos Scarpa, for example, maybe you know, he wouldn't work with any pencil or any paper. He had to choose a certain paper to match a certain pencil. And but the sensitivity and the knowledge and the creativity of the drawings of Frank Lloyd Wright are magnificent, and his renderings too. He also had great draftspersons in his office. He didn't do everything alone, but I think this sketch is by him. And this is another drawing for, I don't know why I show the price tower here, back to the Guggenheim Museum. Now, those people who are afraid to be assertive in an urban context should remember that this building by Frank Lloyd Wright shows clearly that you can be, you can advocate an harmony through contrast. This building has nothing in common with the buildings around it, nothing. And yet, you cannot remove it from New York City. It's a building that, for example, Frank Lloyd Wright, Kenneth Frampton considers one of the 3 best architectures in New York City. One being the Guggenheim Museum, the second one being the Seagram building by Mies van der Rohe, and the third one, the Austrian Cultural Center by Raymond Abraham. That's what Kenneth Frampton thought. I spent New Year's Eve in this building because my daughter was volunteering for the Guggenheim Museum, and she received, you know, tickets for her family to attend New Year's Eve. I mean, yeah, the New Year's Eve inside the building, which I did, and I was, I mean, together with my wife and my daughter, and I remember talking all night with a guard, you know, someone who was just not the doorman, but you know, someone in the administration of the building at a low level who had a doctorate in art history. So the museum would employ young people, very highly trained, very sensitive, very knowledgeable to do all kinds of jobs. And it's very good because usually society doesn't care too much about, art graduates or art history graduates and so on. The museum has great collections because Peggy Guggenheim was, very intuitive. She invested in art when art was inexpensive from great modern artists, and she created an incredible collection. Here we see the spiral in reverse, but we are going to see the building I'm referring to later on. This is the project that I mentioned for, I don't know exactly its function, having something to do with automobiles. And here we see the Guggenheim in reverse. This was never built, but it was visualized almost perfectly by a recent wizard in digital renderings. We are going to see this project because it is worthy to see it. Here is the master at, around 80 or so, as elegant as ever. And I understood that they employed Italian workers because they couldn't find in the United States the proper, workmen to build this unique building. Again, here is the man as cocky as ever. I wonder what Louis Kahn would have said about him, because Louis Kahn, when he was asked about what he thought about the New York Five, he called them Playboy architects. And Louis Kahn said, I prefer to do what is right the wrong way than to do what is wrong the right way. But in the case of Frank Lloyd Wright, I'm sure he would have been more affectionate and less acid. He had no reason to be acid actually at all. Anyway, a remarkable man, Frank Lloyd Wright, not just in architecture, but also in life. How he was able to marry them so brilliantly for so long, I don't know. Here he is, studying the plans, very elegant. And images from the construction. I always like images of the construction because the process, the viscerality of a building coming into being often impress me more than the finalized work. In this case, no, it's the same dynamics that impresses me both during the construction and in the final work itself. But you see, with the technology, which was, maybe you'll say not very sophisticated, this very innovative building was built. Now, of course, the artists protested, because the artists felt the challenge of the architect. The artists who themselves want attention, they understood that inside this museum it's not so easy to assert yourself because the building is so assertive, so creative. So some artists feel uncomfortable or felt uncomfortable to expose, to exhibit inside the building. They claim that the ramp has an angle and you cannot see well the works on the wall. It's not true. That the angle of the sloping ramp is not big. And it's not true. What could be dwarfing is the quality and the creativity of the building. Here he is with members of the Guggenheim Museum. I imagine the lady is Peggy Guggenheim, who looks extremely happy, and we can only wish to have such clients, rich and enlightened and loving creativity at its highest. The architect matched her dreams, and I truly like her expression. I don't know about that's her father, or I don't know who he is. He looks a little bit more worried and inquisitive, but the lady loves it, and she won, and the building was built. And Frank Lloyd Wright took his hat off in front of his own creation. Nice, something Le Corbusier wouldn't do, because Le Corbusier is depicted in many pictures with his hat still on his head, inside the, you know, or outside La Tourette, or talking with Dominican monks and so on. You know, I wonder why Le Corbusier didn't take his hat off, but we see Frank Lloyd Wright did take his hat off like a civilized man of the world. Nice picture. Anyway, drawings. Here he is again, and I like the way he looks at the building. He, you know, is investigating it, is looking at it, not you know, with a happy-go-lucky expression on his face. He's the professional, the man who knows what he's doing, who knows what he did, and he's analyzing it, you know, accordingly. A romantic man, but a romantic man capable of negotiating with life in his own terms, which again is not easy, and which again I was never able to achieve. But forget about me. Here is again this picture with the clients and the architect. But again and again and again, I admire the expression on the face of Peggy Guggenheim, who loved modern art and loved this building. And since women ruled the world, the building was built. The cars, look at the cars and look at the building. The building is innovative even by today's standards. The cars obviously belong to another time. This is the difference between cars and buildings, between cars and architecture. Good architecture is if it doesn't sound too pretentious, it's timeless. You know, this is a modern building today, it was then, it will be 100 years from now. The cars come and go, the design changes, but the conception of the building still makes it fresh today as it was in 1950, whatever, when it was built. I mean, look at the building. I mean, this is the difference between genius and some architects. Let's not forget the authors of this box behind were from the New York Five, Charles Whitney Siegel. The other four members being John Haydock, Michael Graves, Peter Eisenman, and Richard Meyer. So not any architects, important architects themselves. But can you compare what they did with what Frank Lloyd Wright did? Impossible. And in a way, it's good that they didn't try to challenge Frank Lloyd Wright, because they would not have succeeded. So they remained at the level of as a background, an architectural background for the building by the master. And the master here, and the king here, and the creator here was and is and will be Frank Lloyd Wright, without getting too exalted in our statements. But this is the truth. These are the facts. Giacometti with his beautiful walking man, the sculpture. I mean, great art feels good at home in a great building, in the Guggenheim. It does. This building has no reason, this sculpture by Giacometti has no reasons to feel inferior, to have a complex of inferiority, because the level of creativity is as high as in the building. It looks good here. Hello, Mr. Giacometti. This is that project that I mentioned, and we are going to see visualizations of it later on. That was not a museum, was having something to do with a car. I didn't quite understand what its function was. It was a project that was never built by Frank Lloyd Wright. And here is, you know, the Guggenheim built by Frank Lloyd Wright, and with all kinds of interesting exhibitions taking place there. And I hope I have here some pictures from a provocative show that I liked. But what is interesting, perhaps, is that Le Corbusier, who was so very different from Frank Lloyd Wright, he also conceived museums or the idea of a museum in a spiral, except that Le Corbusier didn't work with abstracted the spiral within a square. So it was a spiral movement, but using still the 90 degrees angle, while Le Corbusier here worked, I mean, the Frank Lloyd Wright worked with, an explicit spiral, so to speak. Here he is with a nice tweed coat. I used to have one very similar. Unfortunately, I lost it and I regret so much, but I love tweed. And I see that Frank Lloyd Wright did too. And he had no complexes, he would use the cane without any kind of, inferiority complex. And he had no reason to, because his spirit was very young. I read, in fact, you can watch yourselves YouTube video. You can see it, an interview with him when he was over 85, and he was truly magnificent in the lucidity, freshness of his statements, and he almost dwarfed the journalist, the TV journalist, who at times almost tried to intimidate him, but he didn't succeed. Wright was great. Anyway, here he is, like a king. It reminds me of the words of Constantin Brâncuș: command like a king, work like a slave, create like a god. Well, here he is, vertical, with his cane pointing towards what was to be done. No questions asked. I mean, if you look at these four men, you realize immediately who was the king, no? Strong belief in himself. He himself said that, early in life, he had to choose between being honestly arrogant or, hypocritically humble. And he chose to be honestly arrogant, and he never looked back. He never had the feeling that he chose incorrectly, something like this. And this says a lot about him. I don't think he was arrogant. He was assertive. He believed in himself. He believed in creativity. He believed in exuberance. I'm sure he suffered in his life like any one of us, but that creativity sustained him until his last day on this earth. The Guggenheim Museum, and let's not forget the expression on the face of Peggy Guggenheim when she saw the model of the building. He obviously didn't have fear of heights at 80 or so. And now it's a show done by an Italian artist inside the big atrium of the Guggenheim Museum. Maurizio Cattelan's amazing art installation in Guggenheim, New York. Here it is. And there are so many interesting shows at the Guggenheim. Not a few years ago, Rem Koolhaas organized a big exhibition here, praising rurality, praising the village. He even installed a tractor in front of the Guggenheim Museum to make his point. Anyway, but this show I always admired from the pictures I saw. It's some kind of an imago mundi in its, deconstructed essentialism. Everything is there. or almost everything, even the Pope, even Picasso. We are look, talking about Picasso. Here he is with sandals. If I am to joke a little bit, but not necessarily telling an untruth, I think Picasso was the worst dressed man ever, and certainly the worst dressed artist ever. Did you see pictures with him? I mean, it's unbelievable how, you know, the quintessential painter of modernity, a master of color, would dress so badly. I read that actually he would receive great clothing from great designers who wanted their pieces to be, you know, used by the famous painter. So he would just throw on him, you know, these pieces of clothing without any consideration for color coordination or anything. It's just incredible that such a great painter would dress so badly. Anyway, this was like a short, you know, side piece of information. What else do we see here? We see many things in this show by this Italian artist. You know, it's a you know a reminder of what life is in its diversity, its problems, its drama, its sadness, its laughter, its perplexities. What else can we say? The Pope. I don't know what he's doing there, but it's a commentary on the Pope, which could make popes rather, you know, uncomfortable. Now, this kind of exhibition wouldn't take place easily in any building, but the building, the spiral of life, the spiral of time, the spiral of creativity that Frank Lloyd Wright built encourages such all kinds of you know, artistic manifestations. So something like this is at home in a building by him, very much so. You know, I don't think this show could have been equally effective in a rectangular space or a rectangular room. Hello, sir. What happened? What happened? You got tired of life? It looks like it. Now you are not the only one. Sometimes, at least. Anyway, preachers, even Kennedy's in the you know coffin. Is he an architect here? Maybe despairing, praying to have a client knock at his door. By the way of clients, I read that Frank Lloyd Wright, in order to impress prospective clients about his success as an architect, he painted the walls in the waiting area in his home studio in Oak Park in gold. Now, it was not perhaps, you know, vulgar gold, it was, you know, a shade of gold, but it was still gold. He also wanted to paint, now that I remember, and I don't want to forget, he wanted to paint the parapets of the falling water building, the Kaufman residence, also in gold. And it was only the discretion of the client that made him settle for a surprise, a pale pink. He was an interesting man, Frank Lloyd Wright. You know, he would take risks. He would, you know, he would do anything to make his way. So again, Frank Lloyd Wright, Charles Whitney Seagull. You cannot compare the two buildings. This is a depot, a storage space, and maybe that they intended it to be so. But I still think that the proximity to the building by Frank Lloyd Wright would have required, I don't know. I mean, it's hard to tell. What could you do behind the building by Frank Lloyd Wright? But I still think that it shows here, you know, the difference between a truly creative architect and architects who, although very well known, less creative. How else to put it? Taliesin West, another very important building or complex of buildings. It still is a school, the Frank Lloyd Wright School, the Taliesin School of Architecture. It was his private studio and home. And you know, this building or complex of buildings is a great testimony about his activity also in the field of education. He didn't work in, you know, hired by schools. He created his own school, and students from all over the world would come, would even pay, I imagine, a fee in order to have the chance to, you know, clean his garden and cook for him and attend. Even I read, you know, even took care of, apparently he had some animals here. So those people took care of the administration of the building and also worked for his projects, learning, studying with him, being with him. And yes, it was, I guess, worthy. So here he is. Do you notice a certain resemblance or relationship between the hats he used to wear very often? Now here, like Le Corbusier, without taking his hat off, but then he's inside his own home. Between his hats and the roofs of some of his buildings, if not of many of his buildings, I do see that, you know, the canopy, so to speak, of the hat has something in common with the canopies of his roofs of some of his buildings. He ran away from the city. He didn't like the city. He liked nature. He liked the desert. And he built here in complete freedom using stones, colored stones. He loved stones. He loved bricks. What can we say? So again, he had two residences, two studios, Taliesin East and Taliesin West. This is Taliesin West in the desert in Arizona. Here he is. Only men, apparently, or almost all men, is students or apprentices. Architecture was everywhere, in the living room with renderings, on the drafting boards, in the studio, everywhere. Why? Because he was an architect. And the moon is full in this picture. Stones, big stones, rough stones. Zaha Hadid said that her ideal was to build a raw, earthy, and vital architecture. I don't think her architecture was ever raw and earthy, but the architecture of Frank Lloyd Wright is. Taliesin West. And it must have been beautiful when there were many young people here, you know, working with him, working for him, studying with him. They had concerts, they had all kinds of events. They were not doing just architecture. It was life and art, life and architecture. Now, these chairs that he designed maybe are a little bit too geometrical. I'm not sure that you know, if he would have employed furniture designed by other people, if it would have been bad, probably not, but maybe it was too much of him a little bit here because of those pieces of furniture, a little bit. But he himself, with humor, commented on his own chairs that he designed, and he acknowledged that they were not the most comfortable chairs in the world. When you try to control everything through architecture, when you have genius like he had, but still, you know, it's like, I don't know, maybe I have a questionable position, but I wish sometimes, you know, he would just allow for more space for someone else. I remember I saw a retrospective of his work at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and I left dizzy from there. You know, it was dwarfing. It was too much. It was too much. It's just too much. And I look here where everything, he designed everything except the piano. I think there is a piano there. I'm surprised he didn't design also the piano. But I love very much. Apparently, he was a collector also. He collected everything. He loved beauty. What can we say? So this is a ceramic work, an artwork, Chinese perhaps, that he incorporated into the exterior. And I love this. You know, it shows how unconventional he was and how much he loved beauty. You know, he was also a collector. Yes. Sometimes I read he would pay his employees. He didn't have money any longer, so he would pay them with Japanese woodcuts from his collection. You do have to have this generosity and openness to love everything, to love life, to love art, to love everything, you know, and yes, even to collect. Why not? There were great collectors in the past, like Dürer or Rembrandt. You know, if you love beauty, or Balzac, you love beauty, what can you do? You borrow money in order to buy something that doesn't have another utility except its beauty. But sensitive people cannot live without beauty. What can you do? But what I like here is this meeting between, you know, rather detailed, you know, artwork in ceramic, and then the roughness of concrete around it. So it's conjunctio oppositorum, uniting the opposites. Roughness and, you know, smoothness. The studio as it is now, as you can see, with monitors and, you know, and so on. But the architecture of the studio is still luminous, and I wouldn't mind at all to work in such an office. Still drafting boards, yes. I don't know if it's still used for the school, because it was a school. And I imagine it still is. Aaron Betsky was the director of this school some years ago. I don't think he is any longer. So this is a small resolution picture of the complex of buildings. The students also built themselves, perhaps also during his lifetime or after he died, a small pavilion, small little houses for themselves, like this one. This was built by the students at this school, Taliesin West, after he died. And I think they are nice, these little, you know, buildings. Or this one. Again, these were not built by Frank Lloyd Wright, but by his students in his school after he died. Or this one. Scattered around the main buildings that were built by Frank Lloyd Wright at Taliesin West. And we see a student right here, right now, in this picture, working on it, on one of them. Or this one, you see just a little cell with a bed, and you climb there and you are happy. Who wouldn't be? I love the way he works with stones and concrete. You know, he wasn't happy with concrete just by itself, but like this, using it like a mortar between various pieces of stone, various colors, textures. I think it's, again, it shows his creativity. Another pavilion, if I am to call it so, by the students after he died in more recent times. A nice intervention, I would say, between the cactuses. Taliesin West. Stones, water, some trees, the blue sky, vegetation. I guess these are solar panels, you know, for energy. Somebody, you know, planted them there, and this is the complex of buildings in Arizona, Taliesin West. Aaron Betsky, who was the director of the school, said at that time, "I look forward to continuing the tradition of experimental architecture he did so much to define." So Aaron Betsky, an important you know, architecture critic, theoretician, and architect himself, who also directed the Venice Biennial, I think in 2008 or something like this, took his role as the director of the school seriously, advocating experimental architecture, just as Frank Lloyd Wright did. But he's not any longer the director of the school. I don't know who is the new director. This is the entrance into the campus. Look at this splendid stone wall. You know, it's decorative, it's ornamental, it's vital, it's vigorous, it's raw, it's earthy, it's everything. In itself is an artwork. Just because of the way he employed these stones, he was not indifferent to the, you know, the crystallization of an artistic message through organic materials. So there is structure and there is also ornament. And here he is with three of his, should I call them students, or, you know, his employees, his now there is or they moved from there to the Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation. Look at this lamp, his creation, and look at you know, the architectural entities around it. Look at the door itself, a creation, and it's not you know, it looks like a door, not a main door or anything, and yet it's a particular door. It's a door with individuality, with personality. Now we go to a third project we are looking into in detail. I mean, a built work, Robbie House, the famous Robbie House in Chicago. These are the drawings. The building looks much more spectacular in reality, so to speak, than in this drawing. I think this drawing, I, I don't think this drawing was done in his office. It was probably done later. Anyway, this is the building. Brick, of course, South Chicago. Robbie House. What do we see here? And here, and here? Fire, the hearth, the chimney, the fireplace. For him being the most important thing, the central part of the building, not necessarily the geometrical center, but the heart of the building. The heart in a human body also is not quite in the center, it's a little bit off. Well, here it is off too, but it is the almost the axis mundi for the house. And here it is. Also should be noticed, I think, that the glass on the doors and windows is not left plain. As you see, it has the ornament of the stained glass window. It has character. Why is it that Frank Lloyd Wright was not happy in some of his works, important works, with just plain glass? Well, it's true. He worked with craftsmen who knew what they were doing. These days, it wouldn't be so easy to do something like this. But it doesn't even cross our mind to do something like this. We are happy with large pieces of glass which have nothing inscribed on it or on them. And the larger, the better. But this was not what Frank Lloyd Wright did. Robbie House. Chicago. Snow. If we keep building in concrete and we keep covering the earth with asphalt, it might be that one day there won't be snow in Chicago either. Because in Bucharest we didn't have snow in the past three winters. Robbie House. For such windows, you don't need curtains. I mean, for reasons of privacy, you might need, but you might insult the windows and the building if you employ them. Rather large, this space, for service drive and the garages. The garages look rather small, but they are still for 3 cars. I look at this part of the building and I wonder. He designed everything, the chairs, the lamps, maybe even the rugs. But I still think the ceiling is a little bit low. I mean, you see the height of the kitchen counter. Well, you know, the ceiling in that area is low. But even in the living room, it is low. Low. And this is an opulent house. I remember the falling water, and we are going to see that building too here in detail. When I visited it, I noticed that when you enter the building, it's a very dark, narrow, and with a low ceiling corridor, and then you enter the living room. And the idea was to have a contrast between the darkness and narrowness of the corridor and the vastness of the living room. But still, I thought at the falling water, the ceiling was a little bit low. Although I understand very well the reason behind having, you know, this contrast. You enter, you know, through a space which is not auspicious. So then, by contrast, the living room appears to be even bigger. The Robbie house. Here it is, the building. I like this rendering, and this was done in his office, you know, very abstract in a way, but expressing very well the spirit of the building. It's a very famous building by Frank Lloyd Wright, as you know, and there are many renderings of it done after Frank Lloyd Wright's time. Now, of course, today, maybe we will abstain from using so much electricity during the day if we think about what we call sustainability. And it's not about being politically correct. The truth is we abuse the earth, we abuse nature, we abuse the climate, and we had too much confidence in ourselves as human beings, the shepherds of existence. But are we truly so? He was an optimistic creator, but he was not confronted with what we are confronted with, the climate change and all kinds of issues. This doesn't mean that he didn't have problems in his life. He did, and you saw the expression on his face when meeting the Guggenheim family and inspecting the site, the Guggenheim Museum site. And he had a serious meditative expression on his face. He was not a vulgar, happy-go-lucky architect, happy that he threw another shadow on the earth through his other new building. And by the way of electricity, I would suggest to you, if you are interested, to watch a very short film by Akira Kurosawa, a very important Japanese filmmaker. It's called The Village of Windmills. It's 10 or 15 minutes long, and you can see it on YouTube. Why do I mention it? Because in that short film, one young man is puzzled by the fact that an old man he was talking to, he didn't have electricity in his modest little house. And he said, how could you live without electricity? What would you do at night? And the old man said, well, at night I'm supposed to sleep. And, the young man said, yes, but it's dark. Well, he said, it's supposed to be dark. It's night. And, most days when it is, clear, when there are clear skies, we have the light from the stars. But something like this is unimaginable today. We cannot conceive without living without electricity. This very meeting here on Zoom would not be possible without electricity. Anyway, please, if you want to watch that beautiful short film by Akira Kurosawa, Village of the Windmills. Maybe it will teach us about living a little bit more modestly and more wisely on this earth. So you see, yes, the light fixtures are integrated into the design. He was certainly not short of electrical bulbs. Anyway, moving forward, Robbie House, Chicago, the fireplace, an ornamental design in the Robbie House. Even a tie. I think he designed even this tie. And it's on the, on the iron fence, and the windows, on the glass of the windows and the ceilings. Again and again, ornament is present, but an ornament that he designed. So the house was designed for Frederick Robbie, a bicycle manufacturer, who had 3 cars, though. We see them in the plan, who did not want a foam done in the typical Victorian style. Robbie desired a modern floor plan and needed a garage and a playroom for children. He also required that his home be fireproof, yet retained an open floor plan free of closed box-like rooms that would prevent the uniformity of decoration and design. So it was done for a bicycle manufacturer, Mr. Frederick Robbie. Now, Price Tower, I already mentioned it, and now it's the time to look at it in more detail. It's truly a remarkable tower. Of course, we have much taller and bigger skyscrapers, but this tower is a lesson in architecture. Look at the plan. It has a hybrid function. There are offices, there are hotel rooms, there is a dwelling there. You can see it's complex, it's simple, it has variations, is alive. How else to put it? And again, ornament is present. I don't want to stress too much this fact, because it's still rather discreet, but it exists. It brings sensitivity to the building, and the building, I think, it's organic. It's not a confusing organicity. It's organized, but it is I don't know how to say. It is somehow woven. It's a woven building, vertically woven. Price Tower, Oklahoma, and look at the rendering itself, magnificent. In its lack of ardor to impress, it's as it should be. It's a rendering that doesn't try to seduce with dramatic skies and equally dramatic, if not even more dramatic, expensive cars in the front and so on. You look at the architecture, that's what counts, the building. And we see the section and we see the plans, and everything works very well together. It's dynamic, the plan. It has a built-in rotation, almost swastika-like in a way. Price Tower. It also has color. It's not white. And it's good it's not white. In my opinion, it's one of the best, taller towers, taller buildings that were ever built. Without being very tall, no, but it has an intrinsic verticality. It is tall in a qualitative way, not quantitative. This is a drawing done after, after he died. But the building is, and you see, it's abstract, but it's also organic. It's also as you see the patina on the metallic part of the building. It has a soul. It is in a certain way porous. It communicates. It's open. It even has a certain fragility, I would say, besides the fact that it is an assertive building, but it is a sensitivity here at work, which is warm. It cannot be otherwise, but warm. You cannot compare it with any building around it, and not just around it. I love the Price Tower. just as he did with the concrete blocks in the textile houses in California, he works with the copper detail, if we are to call it detail, which is also with the created ornamentation incised in it. And it is important to notice it. An office during the construction, a chair. Is it for the dentist office? I don't know, but it looks futuristic for today, even for today. Very nice.
Recording in progress.
Designed especially for the price tower. Please be kind and turn off the microphone. I hear a noise in the background. Please do so, unless you want to say something. Thank you. I mean, these are buildings. Please be kind and turn off the microphone, otherwise I do not continue the presentation. Thank you. Please turn off the microphone. Anyway, there's some of these furniture is anyway, here he is with his cane, sure of what he created, and he created a good work, a very good work. And here we see his his employees, if I were his students in Ateliers and West, working on the model, risking their lives. I mean, I'm talking about the lady, standing up on the table.
Recording in progress.
Here they are. Please be kind and turn off the microphone. A clock, even a clock, designed for this particular tower. Lloyd Wright. Another ornament, other chairs designed in his office, tables and stools, sofas, artwork, and the architect.
Recording in progress.
He died 64 years ago. With his third wife, Olgivana, they met in a theater, I understood. I don't know who these people are, but the architect is on the left. Now, Johnson Wax, another very important complex of buildings built by Lloyd Wright. This is the famous large space with the mushroom columns, which I was timid to enter this space when I visited it, and I looked at it through the doors. It was Sunday and it was closed, the office. And I mentioned that Toyo Ito, in some strange way, in my opinion, paid homage to Wright by making an architecture clearly inspired by what we see here. Anyway, this is the tower, which appears to have, it's very interesting because it has actually a double number of floors than what appears here, because you'll understand in the section. You know, it doesn't have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 floors, but 12. It's an interesting way to monumentalize a building which is actually not very tall. He designed everything, the desks as well, not just the interior space, not just the structure. I hope I have here a picture showing the, you know, the testing of this mushroom column. Sometimes the engineers were less enthusiastic about his proposals. This happened at the Falling Water building. We are going to look at that building too in detail a little bit later. This is in Wisconsin, the Johnson Wax building. Corporate offices and research laboratory, precast concrete and brick. We remember he was born in Wisconsin. Also in Wisconsin was his other home and studio, Taliesin East. You see these columns, they have a character, you know, they have a base, they have a culmination at the top, which is distinct from the bottom. I don't have here slides. I took many pictures and some of them were, I think, interesting, but this I took from the web. But you can still see that, that this man was thinking of everything. The column is not just that banal round or square column, the same from the bottom to the top. No. So again and again, the structure becomes ornamental in the sense that it is infused with aesthetical virtues or values. In other words, the structure is not separated from the aesthetics of the building. It participates actively and creatively to the beauty of the building. Johnson Wax, Wisconsin. And here created with these tubes, he always loved to experiment with new materials, new technologies, but in his own way, in his own creative way. So here with tubes, he created this curved glass. I hope I have some pictures to see the whole curvature of the covering of a corridor that was done in this way. And here it is, the testing of the mushroom column, with people looking from afar, rather afar, from it, you know. It worked. Slender as it is, or slender as it was, as it is. Here are the men, the cocky men, all with hats, looking at the wonder mushroom column. And here you see the, you know, how he created this covering out of glass tubes. Johnson Wax, Wisconsin, and the tower, mysteriously, you know, profiled, so to speak, at night because of the lighting and the you know, the interesting way in which he conceived it, you know, in section. History of innovation, dendriform columns, 1936, Frank Lloyd Wright. A little bit difficult to read and to absorb so much material, but today is a special day. 64 days ago, Frank Lloyd Wright died. Here they are, the workers doing this innovative thing with the glass tubes. Here he is with Mr. Johnson, the client. You know, in such cases, I think the clients should be acknowledged as authors of the work as well, because without them, the work would not have come into being. So here, not just the architect was creative, but also the client. A building is not erected just by the architect. It's a collective effort. And often, you know, a creative dialogue between the architect and the client brings forth a creative work. Just as Vincent van Gogh could not have painted without Theo, his brother, who supported him, Frank Lloyd Wright could not have built a building without the person on the right, Mr. Johnson. So you need men of vision of various, you know, levels in the process of erecting the building. It is one of his best works here in Racine, Wisconsin. I look at the, you know, above the reception desk, you know, this lady here, this receptionist, you know, is in the vicinity of that beauty that John Ruskin observed in The Tale of the Peacock, when he said, John Ruskin, that, you know, what is beautiful is the most useless. And he gave us an example, the splendor of the tail of the peacock. Now here again, Frank Lloyd Wright could have created a flat ceiling and that's it. No, it was not enough. In fact, this receptionist probably feels like a queen right there. A desk, a chair, the glass tubes used frequently and creatively, rendering the building from above, the building close proximity, statue, artwork. We need artworks as well. Okay, and now we go to the third presentation with a few other buildings, important buildings by Frank Lloyd Wright. And then the last presentation today will be with unbuilt works by Frank Lloyd Wright and visualized in recent days. So Wright, 03, Unity Temple, Chicago. This is it. I visited it, I saw it. It's, you know, a religious building, but the Unitarian religion is, you know, has a different conception, for example, about what working for the Spirit should be than, let's say, the, you know, the Orthodox Christian religion. It's more like an assembly hall, a gathering room. It's a temple. The architecture is perfectly suited for what the function of this building was supposed to be. I didn't feel overwhelmingly impressed there because of this. You know, I expect, it's true, with my own limitations, you know, a church or a temple even to be more mysterious inside, and this is very luminous and cubistic and almost rational in a way. It's almost a logical building. It's built very well. It's the articulation of all the parts is very convincing. But if you see this picture and you don't know what it is, would you call it you know, a church or a temple? With some license, I would say. So Frank Lloyd Wright himself belonged to the Unitarian religion, and this was built, you know, for it. But it has this the dual function. You see the community space, and then it's the temple, and it's a hybrid function in a way. The social aspect of it is also important. In Oak Park, Chicago. Unity Temple, Oak Park, Illinois, 1908. An early work, I mean an earlier work by him. It seems he liked light fixtures. I see a lot of them here too. So is this intertwining, so to speak, between natural light and artificial light? Two kinds of constellations, so to speak. Now, Falling Water, Pennsylvania. I should have had a few more pictures with the Unity Temple. I apologize. Falling Water, Pennsylvania. Here is Mr. Kaufman, the client. The client, about whose life the building doesn't say much. And this is a point I try to make, that Villa Savoie, for example, doesn't say anything about the Savoie family. And the Falling Water building by Frank Lloyd Wright doesn't say anything about the Kaufman family. It only says that it's an architecture by Frank Lloyd Wright, and yes, that it was commissioned by this gentleman and his family, the Kaufman family. Here they are, on the right, Frank Lloyd Wright, on the left, Mr. Kaufman, the client, at Taliesin West. As I said, apparently the master of the game, the architect, designed the building in 2 hours. Those 2 hours that were necessary for Mr. Kaufman to arrive at the studio of Frank Lloyd Wright in order to see the plans. Here they are with the son, who was instrumental of commissioning Frank Lloyd Wright. So this is Kaufman Jr. on the left, the son of Kaufman Sr. on the right. And Frank Lloyd Wright with white shoes, could this be? But white shoes seem to come back to fashion these days. Anyway, I sometimes, it amuses me to start showing some pictures from the bottom up with the shoes of those I want to depict. Here is actually the Kaufman family, the clients and the inhabitants of the famous falling water building. On the left, Mr. Kaufman Sr., in the middle, Kaufman Jr. with a book like a student at Columbia, and on the right, the wife of Mr. Kaufman. So here they are. They commissioned Frank Lloyd Wright, and thus this famous building came into being. I think this is this lady is, I think, if I'm not mistaken, Olgivana, the wife, the third wife of Frank Lloyd Wright. And it might be that this is Kaufman Jr. I'm not sure about this, but she is the last wife, so to speak, the third wife of Frank Lloyd Wright. Olgivana, a drawing, a preliminary rendering or study drawing for the famous building. As I said, initially Frank Lloyd Wright wanted to color or to paint the parapets of these terraces in gold, and it was only the discretion of the client that made him renounce this idea, and he settled for a pale, kind of a pale pink, still a little bit extravagant, if we know what pink means. So what was unusual about this building, and I mentioned it, that you enter through here and in a narrow space, and the living room is appears to be wider than it actually is, in contrast through the narrow space you enter. Also, do you notice here it's a canopy made of pergola, of concrete beams, and one is a little bit curved. You see this one here? Well, this is in order to accommodate a tree. Otherwise, if it went straight, the tree would have been cut down, and he wanted to save the slender tree. This detail to me tells me a lot about Frank Lloyd Wright. He had the highest affection for everything that nature gave birth to. And this is in a forest. And this was a very slender, young, thin tree. You know, most architects probably would have had no trouble to cut it down. No, he went through the trouble of creating this architectural element to move it around the tree so it would be saved. And I hope I have a picture with this, but you see it in the plan. Very nice. And I think we can learn from Frank Lloyd Wright. I'm not so sure about this, the acrobatics part of the project to bring the building above the falling water, the fire of his creativity over the water of nature. and the engineers told him that it would affect the building, the structure of the building, and this actually happened. When I visited it, they were collecting money here at the entrance to restore the building, which was severely affected exactly by the fact, maybe it wasn't the only fact, but exactly because of the fact that the building was too assertive, being projected above the falling water instead of having the building look at the water, as most people would have done or would have expected. But I think Frank Lloyd Wright wanted the building to marry the falling water, so to speak, to intermingle with the falling water. His own fire with the water of nature to come together. And, you know, they don't come easily together because fire and water do not mix well. Anyway, again, most architects would have placed the building, because they had all the space at their disposal, away from the falling water, maybe a few meters away. No, he placed the building exactly above the falling water. So you are together with the falling water, maybe less able to see it, but more able to be with it, together with it, to hear it, to smell it, to tremble together with it. And unfortunately, the building, it seems, did begin to tremble over the years and needed major repairs. And it's not such an old building, you know, and I mean, but then, you know, the School of Architecture built by Peter Eisenman in Cincinnati needed intensive and extensive repair work just 20 years after it was built. Here is a guest house with a rather unusual covered with a pergola, a path that unites the main building with a guest wing, as it is called. I guess this, or the equivalent of these drawings, were made in those 2 hours, since Mr. Kaufman Sr. called Frank Lloyd Wright, telling him, Frank, in 2 hours I will be at your office to see the drawings. And the master created them. There are plenty of drawings of this famous building done at various times. This is obviously not done during his time. There are some curious things, perhaps. You see this big terrace, which connects with the master bedroom, which is much smaller than the terrace, but the terrace itself seems to be bigger than the one underneath, which is connected with the living room. This is an oversized terrace, and you wonder, because this is connected with a private bedroom. Yes, a master bedroom, but still, you know, what would 2 people do on this huge terrace here? I would ask. Computerized drawings. Here you see that tree that he saved by curving the structural element, the architectonic entity. You see it here. It's avoiding the tree. I mean, it is allowing it to live. And the entrance into the building is through here. So that this tree, this thin tree, this young tree probably is, you know, some kind of a guardian of the entrance, if I am to fantasize a little bit. Now imagine these parapets if they were painted in gold, in some, you know, maybe not any gold, like in his studio in Oak Park, you know, a shade of gold, but You wonder why. I think because he was mainly uncomfortable with concrete, and these were done in concrete. I don't think he was comfortable with concrete. That's why he wanted to he wanted to hide in a way the concrete behind some kind of a shade of gold. And I understood he settled for a light, very light shade of pink. The floor of the living room, stone from the place. There are also big rocks from the place which are part of the living room. So again, without the Kaufmann family, this building would not have been. Here it is. You see the great, beautiful homage that the architect paid to the slenderest of trees. In a forest, I repeat, there are thousands of trees there. He wanted to save even this tree. This says a lot, and we should not forget, and we should do the same. Let's not cut down any tree. Well, some famous sculptor here with the work. And there is a way, I hope I have pictures where you can come close, you know, near the water of the falling water. I hope I have pictures here to show you how you can descend. So you can even put your feet in the water. During the construction, the falling water I wrote because it's about the drama of restoring it. Here is the, I hope that's what I have. Anyway, let's go back. So this is how the falling water was before Frank Lloyd Wright built his building. Again, the Kaufmann family, and here is maybe Mr. Kaufmann Sr. You know, it was an adventure, but I think any great building coming into being is and should be an adventure. During the construction, you can imagine they went through troubles because, you know, it was unusual for the builders as well to build above a falling water. Almost part of it. So literally, I think, I don't know if Frank Lloyd Wright thought in these alchemical terms, but I think he wanted to marry fire with water. Conjunctio oppositorum, the conjunction of opposites, the fire of his building, and we know that fire was central to his architecture, especially in domestic architecture. Fire was the generator of everything, the hearth. Not to speak about the fire of his passion and the fire of his creativity. So you had the fire of the human, that he was the fire of human activity, and the water of the falling water, the water of nature, coming together, fire and water. There is this website, structural.net case study, Frank Lloyd Wright's falling water, where you can see, I hope I have here some pictures showing the troubles they went through in order to restore the building. Yes, here they are. You know, engineers with equipment, with technology. Because yes, the architect, the romantic architect, ignored the advice of the engineers. By the way, I read an anecdote that one night, Mr. Kaufmann Sr., the owner of the house, called Frank Lloyd Wright at home saying, "Hey, Frank, it's raining in the living room." And apparently Frank Lloyd Wright answered to him, "Come on, Edgar, you don't have a pot?" So this was the architect at his most assertive. You know, he was not intimidated. He asked the client to put a pot underneath the leaking part. Here are the technicians, the engineers working hard to save the building. And as I said, they were collecting money when I visited the building in order to save it, because, you know, these people had to be paid. I wonder if Lloyd Wright knew about this. I mean, I wonder what if he would have known about this. He probably would have smiled and he would have said, sure, let them work, let them save the masterpiece. This is the piece that opens and you can go from the living room down the stair in close proximity, so you are close to the water. I hope I have a picture also from near the water. You see how it is opened. You know, it opens this thing rather ingeniously, and you go down the stairs and you can put your feet actually in the water. Nice. Tourists. But you see, a creative architecture and architecture, if it is to deserve its name, it has to be creative. Otherwise, it doesn't deserve its name. Otherwise, it is not architecture. But you see, the architect died, but the building is receiving visitors, countless of them every year. Because this is the power of art. This is the power of good architecture. It stirs up imagination, curiosity. It encourages you to have courage yourself, to take risks in life, to live authentically, to live adventurously. This is the bedroom. And again, the living room. And the stone outside. But as you saw, there is also plenty of stone inside. Metal, glass, and stone. I still think he didn't quite resolve these parapets. They still look a little bit alien to me. You know, I don't know if he was happy with them, with a, you know, light pink shade or not, but they seem to say that indeed Lloyd Wright was not very comfortable with concrete. Now, if we look at this picture, we will say this is fire over water. This is man over nature. And I don't know, we can talk about it. Can we continue in this way? Somebody told me that we went so far in subjugating nature, in enslaving nature, that at this point, we cannot any longer aspire towards creating an harmony or peace between man and nature. Now there is war between man and nature. Either man wins the war with nature, or nature wins the war with man. But I don't think man can win in fact, there shouldn't be a war between man and nature, but I don't think it is possible, and it's not even desirable. Nature will always have the upper hand. Because we are nature, not just, I mean, there is nature not just outside of ourselves, but also inside of ourselves. And we obviously didn't conquer the nature within ourselves. That's why we need myriad of therapy centers. And I saw once a map with psychotherapy centers in Manhattan, in New York. There were countless, thousands and thousands of therapy centers. Why? Because we might asphalt you know, our roads and cover the earth with concrete and cement and so on, but we cannot conquer our inner demons. And it's shown very clearly in Ukraine right now. So in what way can we claim winning the war with nature? In fact, there shouldn't be a war to begin with. Anyway, the living room again, falling water, stone, lots of stone, local stone, right there on that plane, on that room, in that space. Is it a modest house? No, it is not. It is not a modest house. I mean, if I look at this picture, does it show a perfect marriage between man and nature? I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Man is still assertive, very assertive. But we know Frank Lloyd Wright loved nature very much. But here is the platform where you can descend to, and then, you know, you are very close to water from the living room, the one that I talked about a few minutes earlier. It almost looks like a rendering. Maybe I'm subjective, but at this very point, I'm actually bothered about those concrete parapets of his terraces. Something is wrong with them, I feel, but I don't know. Anyway, I'm subjective, of course. This is the, you know, the passage from the main house to the guest house with the, you know, the canopy, the pergola above, concrete as well, thin, very thin. This almost looks like a sculpture by Brâncuș here on the desk. And I like the fact that finally I see a chair which was not designed by Frank Lloyd Wright, and I actually think it looks good, and it adds something to the interior space of the building designed by him. Now, sorry about this. When I created this presentation, I discovered this strange house in Belgium, and I thought of including it here. It has nothing to do with Frank Lloyd Wright, but it shows what a distance between the building designed by Frank Lloyd Wright and our present. This was built not too long ago, some years ago. Look at this. A different version of a, you know, some kind of a connection with nature. So this is a building in Belgium designed by this architect, Jacques Gier. And I found it remarkable in a very different way than Falling Water, but it's a house we cannot ignore, in my opinion. I wonder what Frank Lloyd Wright would have thought of this house if he knew it. You look at the improvised furniture there, it's almost like, you know, found objects, you know, on the street. Maybe the people who owned the house ran out of money and they couldn't buy furniture for their own house. You see, that was that older couple there living in a very unconventional house, more unconventional, in fact, than Falling Water, a cave-like, and provocative towards the outside. So this is a house which has no glory. It's not known, it's not famous, but I don't think it's less provocative or creative than what we saw before. Now, the Larkin building, the one that was demolished by Homo sapiens in Buffalo, New York, This is a graphic image of it. It's very sad that this building was destroyed. It was one of the more important buildings by Frank Lloyd Wright. It vanished from the earth because they wanted to build a station for trucks, and that was not built, and it is a parking lot at this present. That's why this building came down. Unbelievable. Anyway, we are going to see some visualizations of the building in the last part of this presentation, and we are approaching the end with quick speed, or with speed. Anyway, this is the building, the Larkin building by Frank Lloyd Wright in Buffalo, New York, upstate New York. You see it here in this postcard. It doesn't exist any longer, as I said. And images from the inside. There is the statue of Nike there, you know. Apparently, you know, if I remember correctly, Kenneth Frampton says something about, you know, these workers working in these almost church-like or cathedral-like or this majestic interior, but in essence still being, you know, little servants of a structured economy. And you know, here we read thought-filling action, because there are inscriptions, you know, inviting to a you know, the correct corporate atmosphere, but you know, but yes, you could read it even in negative terms, you know, because this emphatic atrium, this emphatic interior space serves what function? You know, it's, you know, you have these people working, you know, at the desks for some repetitive task, but the space above them is, you know, maybe sublime, but the task at hand is not sublime at all. And imagine, for example, little bureaucrats, you know, accountants or whatever, doing the little things inside the cathedral. You know, this is not quite a cathedral, but the space has an emphasis on the verticality of the central space, which is contradicted by the, you know, perhaps the banality of the work that is done at those desks. But the building is an excellent building. I mean, if you can, you know, make abstraction of some speculative, you know, ill-intentioned comments about the conflict between the function of the space and the, you know, the qualities, its architectural qualities. Again, we are going to see, and I think it's very interesting that today we can do visualizations even of unbuilt works or demolished works, which are very satisfying because they actually look even more convincing than the pictures of the actual building. I like the graphics too, just like in the case of the Robbie house, just with, you know, these black surfaces, kind of like in the drawings of Eric Mendelssohn. So even graphically, the office of Frank Lloyd Wright was doing innovative work. Too bad this building does not exist any longer. The Temple of Work, the Larkin building, it lasted until 1954. Famous Larkin building being raised under sale agreement between city and purchaser. Somebody bought it in order to demolish it. Unbelievable. Frozen firefighter water on a burnt building, New York, 1920s. You know, whatever documentation material I found, I put here on the presentation. Maybe too much of it. I have to refine it a little bit. I guess it was also neglected for a number of years. So, what can we do? Recently, it was erased, a famous tower by Kisho Kurokawa in Tokyo. I hope not for a parking lot. But nothing should have justified erasing that building by Kurokawa, in as much as this building by Wright. Intelligence, enthusiasm, and control. Now, I don't know. I'm not sure about that part, control. I am reluctant to control. It's true. Self-control maybe, but just control by itself, cooperation, economy, thought, feeling, action. You see, all these words invited to a certain climate, the ethics of work, corporate mentality in the workers to instill, and this is what remained, and this is what became of the glorious building by Frank Lloyd Wright. That's all it has. I launched once a competition some years ago for a building to commemorate this building, to imagine a new Larkin building instead of the parking lot. You can see the works on icarch.us. Thought, feeling, action. Thought, feeling, action. I would have written feeling, thought, action, because Nietzsche said that thoughts are the shadows of feeling. Feeling should come first, thought second, action third. Anyway, that's what I think. Maybe Frank Lloyd Wright would have agreed. I don't know if he chose those three words in that very order. Buffalo, Larkin building. No use for Larkin building inside. It was neglected. Wright's handiwork being wrecked. Neglect, vandalization, vandalism. Shift a building from Larkin side. It was a tragedy. And here it was. This is what became of it, of thought, feeling, action. Look at it. Homo sapiens, anthropos, and that's all that remained. Just a fragment of one of its walls. That's it. A monument to human foolishness. And look what replaced the Larkin building. Would you say that this is the work of Homo sapiens? I wouldn't. No way. If at least was created a park, but a parking lot, it's just incredible. I can look at these pictures. Now the Darwin D. Martin residence, I showed the picture. Sorry, I don't know what happened here. I guess I'm getting tired after all. There are more than 3 hours, 3 hours and a half since I talk. I have to finish at 6 to meet a man of word. Just a second, we'll restore immediately the presentation. So we saw this one. And now the Darwin D. Martin residence, another building by him, a big residence, also in Buffalo, New York. It's a very big building, maybe even bigger than Robbie House. The architecture is not very dissimilar from the Robbie House. But since we are in Buffalo, I thought of showing this building as well. On this day when 64 years ago, Frank Lloyd Wright died. Without him actually dying, because we are still talking about him. And it's a good thing we are. Again, this building is in Buffalo, New York. A large residence. I accelerate a little bit because I still want to show you some visualizations of unbuilt works and 2 works that were demolished. So they persist now in being alive through the recent digital visualizations. the Darwin Martin house in Buffalo. And now I think it has new owners, because that's what it is, you know, owners change hands. The domestic symphony we read there. An ample symphony. This is not for proletarians. This is not a house for proletarians. This is a house for, you know, rich people. And then the victory of what? Of spirit or of money making, or both? Some people would think both. Anyway, I'm not so convinced that you know, the two activities, the two actions are correlative: affluence and spirit, as Deepak Chopra thought or thinks. Anyway, pergola leading to garden. What is this? Ah, in that building, in that very building in Buffalo. Bricks, lights, windows, trees outside, floor, walls, floor, wood floors, stained glass windows, flowers, bricks. Kind of entrapped, that symbol of, you know, a winged creature, a victory. Tree of life, window from the Darwin D. Martin house. Here it is, the tree of life. We don't do this sort of thing any longer, to inscribe symbolisms to our windows or doors. But he did. Frank Lloyd Wright. Okay, and now I go to the last part of the presentation. This would be shorter and quicker. So we end by 6 p.m. here, Bucharest time. Just a second, because I didn't, unfortunately, I didn't open it. I should have. Sorry about this. It should have been accessed, but now we have to wait for it to come alive. Okay, just a second. I hope my old laptop will not break down because of this lack of attention on my part to have it open already. But mistakes are human. Sometimes, maybe oftentimes. Why doesn't it open? Here it is. Okay, sorry about this. Okay. Okay, Frank Lloyd Wright, unbuilt works. Well, I show unbuilt works in digital renderings or visualizations, but I also show two digital visualizations of two demolished works. And one of them is the Larkin building that we just saw. The Trinity Chapel is a building that was never built. And this Spanish architect, and I should have had his name here, and I don't know why I don't, and I apologize. Daniel Romano, I think is his name. It's unforgivable that I don't have his name. It should have been at the beginning, but I did it so quickly this today. Anyway, I'm not excusing myself. This is the Trinity Chapel that Frank Lloyd Wright made a project for. It was never built, but this architect, paying homage to the past and to Frank Lloyd Wright, visualized it as if it was built. and it was not built, but it still has to an extent some level of reality, virtual reality as it is. Is it some kind of a meta architecture? Perhaps. Is it metaverse? I don't know. Maybe to an extent. So the Trinity Chapel by Frank Lloyd Wright visualized digitally in the present. And it is possible to do something like this today, to create or recreate something that in the so-called reality didn't take place. The Trinity Chapel plan, a small resolution, sorry about it. What if one day we'll start or some people start a company building some of the great architectural projects that were never built? For example, some works by Louis Kahn or some works by Frank Lloyd Wright and others. Just as they built Saint-Pierre de Firminy Vert by Le Corbusier, which was built after Le Corbusier died. So what if someone with some means could start an enterprise to build some of the great projects that were never built? I think it would be an interesting activity, endeavor. Gordon Strong Automobile Objective, that's the building, that's the project that inspired in reverse the Guggenheim Museum. Here is the section through this Gordon Strong Automobile Objective, and you are going to see the renderings done today through digital means. This building was never built, but it was visualized as if it was built very recently. Not bad. The drawings of Frank Lloyd Wright and the renderings of a generous architect who wanted to bring to life what didn't quite become alive, in the sense that it was not built. This was the beautiful rendering by Frank Lloyd Wright of the same building, which turned upside down became the Guggenheim Museum. Except that here the spirals are for cars, not for humans. Well, with humans entrapped inside the house, inside the cars. So this is another recent visualization of a building by Wright that was never built. Now the Arizona Capitol was not built, a remarkable project, but it was visualized as if it was built. And here it is. We see digital visualizations of this project that never saw the light of being. Now imagine these buildings were built. It's almost as if they were built, considering the quality of the renderings. There is even a book, and I actually had it, I don't know where it is, a book with visual, digital representations of the unbuilt works of Louis Kahn. So the capital of Arizona could have looked like this if it was built, but it was not built. But it was built digitally, and thus we didn't pollute the air, we didn't consume the resources of the earth, and for spirit, for imagination, maybe is enough. At least we didn't contribute to the deterioration of the climate through building these structures. We build them for the eye and for the spirit, for the imagination. Is it enough? I'm not sure, but it's still something. Not to speak about the fact that demolished buildings continue to live through such visual representations. I think the name of the architect, the Spanish architect, is David Romero, I think, or David Romero, probably. And I don't know why his name is not shown here. It should have been at the very beginning. In fact, this whole presentation is almost dedicated to him as an acknowledgement for what he did, because I think it's very valuable what he did. Bringing to more life a project by projects by Frank Lloyd Wright. Huntington Hartford, Hollywood, California, a house. I only have 2 images, but I wish this building was built, not considering the the participation in the deterioration of the climate of the planet or of the Earth. It's an interesting building. It would have been interesting if it was built, but even like this, partially is satisfying. A skyscraper for Chicago. I found out today that when I created this presentation that I didn't know that Frank Lloyd Wright planned a skyscraper of this amplitude in terms of height for Chicago. I knew he planned a 1-mile tower tall for New York City, but not for Chicago. But look here. I mean, this building here, ladies and gentlemen, is the Sears Tower, now called the Willis Tower, which used to be the tallest building in the world for about 20 years. Well, not any longer. But this is what Frank Lloyd Wright apparently proposed for Chicago. Incredible. But there are some interesting renderings, provocative and dramatic and inciting and enticing. But this was supposed to be tall, ladies and gentlemen, no doubt. But when I discovered it, I thought I read wrongly or was written wrongly, because I knew about the 1-mile tower he proposed for New York City. I didn't know he did something similar for Chicago. Apparently he did. I'm talking about Frank Lloyd Wright. Was he, in this case, was he to be or to become Frank Lloyd wrong because he proposed something so monstrously high? I don't know. I really don't know. I love architecture. I love audacity, but I'm not sure that I'm not sure. I mean, there are plenty of tall buildings around it, and they all look like pygmies, like little pawns on the chess table of Chicago, while this tower is dominating everything by far. So again, ladies and gentlemen, Frank Lloyd Wright was not the most modest man in the world. Although he loved being close to the earth, and although he adored nature, but this vertical thing, you wonder. And yet somehow I like it, it encourages you to be courageous, to be audacious even. But then when you think about the rising levels of the seas, the melting of the icebergs, and all the other troubles we are confronted with, we wonder. But it has force, it has vitality, it has energy, it has optimism. Maybe too much. The National Life Insurance building in Chicago, another building unbuilt and visualized by this artist, and I like this building, with its embroidered facade. I knew the project, but now we see it as almost as if it was built, also for Chicago. not bad. And we see again here the insinuations of ornament into the structure. It's really woven. It's a woven work, and I like it. The car looks so, immaculate in its obsoleteness in the renderings of this architect from Spain. The National Life Insurance Building. Now the floating cabins of Summer Colony, Lake Tahoe, California, unbuilt. I only have 2 images, I think, or 3. Never built, but visualized by this architect. And a beautiful drawing again by Frank Lloyd Wright or someone in his office. Too bad that the new Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation ruined the drawing by putting that stamp there from 1994. Unbelievable. It's unbelievable, I mean, it could have been placed on the back of the drawing. What an insensitive gesture, to put that stamp directly on the drawing. Well, in the corner, but it's still on the drawing. The bureaucrat over the artist. Another rendering of these interesting things that Frank Lloyd Wright thought of. So finally, I say architect David Romero, that's his name, David Romero, has created color visualizations of a pair of now demolished Frank Lloyd Wright buildings, previously only visible in black and white photographs. And with this, I end this mini festival, Frank Lloyd Wright Festival, if I am to call it a little bit emphatically. Let's look at the Larkin building, which we know was destroyed, demolished in 1950. Let's look at the visualizations of a building which does not exist any longer. And these were done by David Romero. Bravo to him. I think he did an excellent job. The Larkin building, demolished for nothing in 1950. Frank Lloyd Wright. There was a lot of work from David Romero to do these visualizations, of course, but he did a good job. And yes, he collaborated with the Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation, from what I understood. It doesn't exist, but these visualizations still prolong the life of the building. And because today is, well, tomorrow will be, no, today is Easter, no, for the Catholic religion, for the Western Christianity, so to speak. We could say that these buildings represent some kind of a, coming back to life. They are reborn through these visualizations of this architect, of this Spanish architect. They are resurrected. It's an act of resurrection. Larkin building. Okay, and the last thing I show today is Wright's Rose Boson house, built in 1942, also features in Romero's Hooked on the Past series, because these visualizations are part of a book even that he published called Hooked on the Past. It's a nice house which was never built, but through David Romero, it gained at least to a percentage life. And I wish it was built, but it was not. But as some kind of a, metaverse project or architectural presence, it works. Are we fooling ourselves with, you know, with images of something that doesn't exist? I don't know. I think spirit is also important. Imagination is important. Psychic projections are important. So I wouldn't dismiss these images. You know, they have their own role. And it is an act of love, an act of affection, an act of paying homage to a great architect by another architect who refuses to accept, you know, entropy, refuses to accept death. And as such, these images say yes to life, I would say. But yes, I wish this building was built because it would have been one of the better buildings by Lloyd Wright. But for some reasons, it was, no, or it was demolished. It was demolished, this one, yes. I'm confused. It was demolished or it was unbuilt. I thought that the last two images are with buildings that were demolished. That's it. So that was it today. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, Dan.
You're welcome.